Okay, good evening, everyone. It's Daishihan Miller, and we are here with our this week's episode of Whiteboard Wednesday. Not this is a Whiteboard Wednesday. What the hell is it? It's KUDEN. That's what it is. It's KUDEN. God, I do way too much of this stuff. Anyway, I got a special guest tonight. We're having a little bit of glitch on that side, so as soon as we can get him to log in, then my friend Will Maier will be joining us, and he and I are going to chat about the good old days and all kinds of stuff, right? And about what I have, like 9 questions and 9 kind of topic areas that we're going to go through. So it's going to be a full-on thing. We'll take some pauses in between different topics and whatnot, so that you guys can ask some questions or comment, as long as they're clean and no dirty jokes and that kind of stuff, right? But we're going to go ahead and fire it up, get started, and I'll talk to you in just a bit.
So, the big question is this: how are self-defense and success-minded people like us, concerned citizens worried about protecting ourselves, our loved ones, and the things we care about from the monsters we know exist in the world? How do we train in a way that gives us the skills, knowledge, and understanding we need without becoming paranoid fighters or killers ourselves, and yet still allows us to be the hero protector the world needs us to be? That's the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. My name is Jeffrey Miller, and welcome to KUDEN Radio, real training for real people in a real world.
Okay, I'm back. I found out that my guest is having some tech issues on that side. No problem. Who knows what we're going to have when we bring things up. This will be the first episode where we have like a split screen thing for those of you on live on the video side of things. Of course, those of you on the audio side, when it hits the podcast directors and whatnot, you won't know the difference. So anyway, so let me just send a quick message here because he's having some tech issues. Let's see. Can join in. Nothing like you guys watching us fix things in real time, right? So anyway, all right. Well, let's do this. While we're waiting for Will to resolve whatever needs to be resolved on that end. Let's see. What can we chat about? I didn't actually prepare for a kind of a plan B. Bad ninja. Anyway, so Will and I are going to talk about this stuff anyway. But how about if we just go down through the topics and whatnot? So Will, I met Will a long time ago. We're talking like mid '80s at, I think, a Shadows of Iga festival, one of the yearly festivals. And then shortly thereafter, because of things that were going on and he was hosting, he had a really big school at that time. And I just had this little training group. But, he had our teacher, or, we were both under Stephen Hayes at that time, coming in for a seminar. So I gathered up a group of students and went down, and it was the beginning of a long, peer relationship, friendship, that kind of thing. So anyway, Will, like all of my, friends and peers and whatnot, has his own martial history, right? Background, that kind of thing, right? So we are going to open things up to everybody along the way. So if you have any questions, right, because we're going to be talking about kind of the way things have changed. We're going to be talking about this idea of modern ninjutsu, and we'll both be sharing, some different viewpoints. In a lot of ways, we see things pretty much the same way, right? But backgrounds are different, and we'll just go. Looks like he maybe. James, can you hit that? James is in the background running tech, so I think he just turned it on there. So we'll see what happens here, right? And let's see. All right, maybe. Will, can you hear me? Let's see. Anyway, so here's your chance, right? So if you have any questions, I don't know, some of you guys may know me, you may know Will, whatever, right? But if you have any questions or comments along these lines, or just about anything training related, you can toss it in there. And then what we'll do as he and I are chatting, we'll take these little Q&A breaks just to see what's in, and those things that fit the topic that we were talking about or just talking about, the most recent, because we want to keep the recording, and we want to keep the flow of things as consistent as possible, right? So those things are going on. Let's see. Will says he can hear me, but we can't hear you. So can you check your settings? There's a little gear there on the right-hand side under the screen. Make sure that your mic is on. Nothing is muted on our side. So let's see. So anyway, you guys can jot these things in. The questions or comments that match what we're discussing in real time, we'll take those first, just so that everything kind of stays fairly consistent, congruent, that kind of thing. And then anything that doesn't match up, we'll save to the end. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible. Will and I are both chatters, so we'll try to keep things to our normal time. Anyway, so we're having some audio things on his side. James, can you see anything where we can fix it on our end here? I'm going to go ahead and throw things back into a single screen for the live guys, and then we'll go from there. Let's see. All right. Let's see. So Will's on. All right. Sorry for the tech issues for those of you guys that are on. Again, we see numbers pop in, go up, go down, and all that. Again, I think a lot of folks they either don't get the idea that this is KUDEN, right? It's this back and forth teacher kind of thing. Let's see. I'm going to type this thing in here. All right. Pop a little private chat thing in there. James, can you see the private chats when they pop up? Okay. Can you kind of intercede and see if you can help him out? All right. Sorry about this, guys. Anyway, but KUDEN, right? For those of you who haven't seen it yet, I have a video over on YouTube that goes through the difference between Taiden, KUDEN, right? And what was the other one that I did? Anyway, there's three of these things, right? And Shinden, right? So these three areas of training. Remember, this Ninjutsu, right? So things tend to get broken into threes, right? And then you can focus on a given area, right? So Taiden is obviously everything that we do with our body, right? So there's this body transmission kind of thing, right? So what you end up focusing on is obviously physical techniques, skills, those kind of things, right? Health issues, those kind of things, right? KUDEN, void transmission, is this idea of the teacher passing things on, you could say spiritually or whatever, but it's a mental, spiritual kind of thing, right? You're discussing knowledge topics and things like that, right? So you can understand strategy, you can understand tactics, you can understand just more about maybe the way the teacher thinks about things, or I hear sound. Hey, there it is. Hello. We're missing your video though.
Yes, we're going to have to do this without video today. Got an issue with that.
No worries. Okay, so
besides, we can see your smiling face. They don't need to see mine right now. Wow. I'm going to be the mystery ninja.
Wow. All right. So anyway, Will Maier. All right.
Hello.
So let me shift over here to my notes so that I have that. And all right. So So I did a little bit of admin cleanup and all that. So again, you guys can post in some questions, comments as we're moving along. And like I said, priority will go to questions or comments that are related to what we're talking about when we take the little break, just for continuity, make it easier for the folks that when this stuff hits the podcast directories, it's not mentally like jumping around and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, that video that I was talking about, 3 areas of training, you can find it on YouTube. Go to the channel there, and you can check that out. Anyway, right? So I was just talking about how the numbers go up and down, and I think people often sign into these things thinking they're going to watch some trained monkey demonstrate even more techniques.
I've been called worse.
Me too. Anyway, so anyway, I kind of alluded to how we met and all that, but I want to back up even before that. So for those of you who do not know Will, right? Well, Will's in the modern ninjutsu kind of area, right? I mean, I do as well, but I kind of mix it up so that whoever's coming in from whatever perspective gets it. But both of us have this same focus of how do we take these ancient lessons, right? These time-tested and proven lessons, and help people make them applicable in today's world rather than playing Ninja Dungeons and Dragons or whatever. I don't know a nicer way to say that, but there's a lot of people out there playing fantasy stuff. So anyway, I'm not sure if there's a way to remove the little window in the window thing down there so we can still have audio. Oh, look at James is just like
it's done.
My magician in the background. All right, cool. All right, so Will, what I thought we'd do is just kind of give you a couple of minutes here to just talk about yourself. Former occupations. I know that you were a teacher and a headmaster at a private school and stuff like that, but just kind of share a little bit about yourself so that everybody gets the idea, and then we'll just kind of progress from there.
Well, first of all, Jeff, thanks so much for having me on your podcast. I've listened a number of times and found them very informative, and have contributed a few emails to you, etc. So I'm really happy to be on here today. I've known Jeff. I was thinking we've probably known each other at least 45 years.
That makes us old, right? Yeah, it sounds about right.
Yeah. Yeah. So we met in the 80s, and this is now 2023 coming up. So it's been a while.
I want to ask people, where were you in the 80s?
Yeah. So we started together. We've done a bunch of martial arts. We had some fun doing ninjutsu together. I started off in martial arts back in the early 70s. Like most people. I'm reading a note from James here.
Getting a no?
A note from James.
Oh, a note from James. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So he wants me to hold on a second. Let me do something here.
This is a first for us, so you're helping us iron out some glitches too.
Okay. He wants me to do something here. I'm setting my phone to okay, I think we got it. All right. So again, trying to be not distracted from the technical issues we're having. I started martial arts a long time ago, and like many people, I started off in Taekwondo. A lot of people back then were doing either Taekwondo, some Judo, and of course Karate, and that was pretty much what was going on back in the 60s and 70s, early 70s for sure. Mm-hmm. And then, like you and a lot of other people on the planet, I saw an advertisement, a demonstration, actually a seminar that Stephen A. was going to do in Baltimore. In fact, a few of my black belts at the time in Taekwondo told me about it. So I said, yeah, I read some stuff about him in the magazines, and let's check it out. So we went there for the weekend in Baltimore, and it was great because I really enjoyed it. The thing I liked that hit me right away, no pun intended, was the fact that ninjutsu basically was a all-encompassing martial art. It wasn't a partial art. Okay, it had grappling, it had striking, it had weapons, it had all this kind of stuff. So instead of having to, learn separate arts, grappling art, a striking art, weapons art, and try to mishmash them together in a cohesive system, ninjutsu had that already. And the thing that I think really was important for me was that it all had a unifying body movement footwork system. So you didn't have to learn different footwork or different movements if you did hanbo as opposed to empty hand. It was all the same. So, for example, if some people try to do a complete martial art, we'll call it, and they took a little bit of a karate system, which had certain, kind of rigid movements maybe. They try to do a weapon system like a fluid Filipino style. They try to do a grappling system with judo or something. And yeah, they sort of had it, but it was not matched. The analogy would be like having a suit, a three-piece suit, and you've got a checkered, coat, and you got striped pants and a polka dot shirt. Technically, it's a suit, but it doesn't really match. So that's, I think,
Some guys are okay with that, though.
Yeah, some people are, but I think ninjutsu again, the weapons, the striking, the grappling, the joint locks, all of it was connected through this tai sabaki and the footwork and body movement, and that made it. I believe it made it, to my opinion, viable and easier to learn all these different components. You didn't have to learn different footwork and different body movements studying. I think that would probably make sense.
Yeah.
Did you find that too?
I did. I actually came, I don't know if you know my background or whatever, but I came from a very violent home life, and of course got into law enforcement and all that. So
yeah, we've talked about that. Yes.
Yeah. I've had to worry about, liability issues because I'm a
Right.
cop. I had to worry about, I was just very, very intimately familiar with violence. And while other arts kind of serve their purposes and whatnot, again, I had to worry about liability. I had to worry about, whatever. And my experience was very much like yours, where here's this base system, but then, at some point they added in weapons, but now the weapon had its own unique way of moving and whatever. And then, it almost seemed like the personal development stuff or the meditation or whatever was tacked on, as opposed to, it all being cohesive. Right.
Right.
And so when I found this stuff, I was already a military policeman. So
right.
I was really looking, and I was actually coincidentally stationed in Korea. So I jumped on the Taekwondo bandwagon because that was what they were doing. Right. Well, that was already problematic. And then there was Kung Fu being taught on the installation. Right. None of these things really matched up. So my first experience, like the very, very first seminar I went to, was like this huge eye-opening.
Yeah, exactly.
Thing. Like I would ask all these questions, like, what if I do this jump kick and the guy gets out of the way and punches me in the groin? I always get these these answers from teachers like, well, you got to be fast enough that doesn't happen, or you got to be tricky enough or whatever. And my first experience, those questions were being answered like, we don't want to do this because if he gets out of the way and punches you, you're full.
Well,
holy crap, this is,
well, even if you look at,
go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Finish. I'm sorry.
Well, what I was going to say was, and this is not knocking anybody in today's world. We were kind of on the pioneering edge of this stuff because I don't know about you, but I was looking for something because of my history, right?
Yes.
Had no idea what it was called, and I kept running into these different martial arts. And so I just knew whether that was it or it was partially it or whatever, right?
Sure.
So when I found this stuff, I didn't have a name. I wasn't looking for something specific. Like in today's world, ninjutsu is like this cool name, these things that people go looking for. But I don't know that they have a litmus test other than ninja are cool and ninja are powerful and ninja, right? I had no idea. As a matter of fact, before I reached out to Stephen Hayes, and that was back in the day where we actually wrote letters and put a stamp on an envelope and mailed them, right? I saw an advertisement in Black Belt magazine over and over again, well, other martial arts magazines, but it was the very first iteration of volume 1 of that ninja series, right? And it was just this blank cover with this hooded guy. And I remember thinking, man, people will freaking sell and buy anything, right? And it wasn't until I found an excerpt from that book as an article in one of those martial arts magazines. And by like the second or third paragraph, I was like, holy shit, I got to learn more about this stuff because this is what I'm looking for, right?
Yeah, I hear you.
Very, very different, right?
Well, I'm similar to you in the fact that I had a reason for doing it, and I wanted to always learn self-defense. I was never really interested in sport martial arts. I did some tournament stuff when I was doing Taekwondo, but and as you probably know, Taekwondo has changed dramatically in the last 40 years. Yeah. And when I started doing, my instructor was a ex Korean Marine, one of those ROKs, Republic Korean Marines.
Trained with those guys.
Yeah, he had fought in the Korean War, and we did a lot of street stuff, and we did Hapkido, Also, we combined with the street taekwondo, and then it got changed to a sport in the 80s because they wanted to compete with judo and karate in the Olympics, and that's when
Right.
it really got sort of changed. And I was really into self-defense, so obviously I started learning stuff. I did some jujitsu. I did some Filipino things, and I sort of liked them. They were practical and more self-defense oriented than the taekwondo was becoming. And then when I met Hayes, I go, oh, hey, this is really pretty cool because it's got everything in there, like we talked about a minute ago. So I started as all over as a beginner. I had, black belts in several different martial arts, but I wanted to, do this. I told my taekwondo students, and they were also doing hapkido with me and a little bit of judo and jiu-jitsu. I said, we're going to do ninjutsu stuff. And some of the stuff was a little similar because we had done some of the joint lockings and the other arts, but it was also new. And it was funny, some of the black belts had the taekwondo. They said, oh, no, I'm not going to switch. I've got a black belt. I want to, have my black belt and get another degree. And they didn't get it that I was moving on. I was willing to start over as a beginner and just learn this new art because I felt it was viable. And it was so important. I was, ready to lose 5 or 6 of my black belts.
Sure.
And but it was a smart move because down the road, I started. I went with Hayes. First trip to Japan was '87, and because I met him. Yeah,
I had military duty, and that. Oh.
Yeah, so I first met him, and I think it was like 83, 84. And then when I started doing this full time, it started taking off, and gosh, with some good marketing, I learned from a professional group how to market the business and do it in a logical way, but also do it in a way that the students were still getting good attention. And I grew the school, it became a very large dojo. We had about 800 students at our peak. But I had 5 or 6 full-time instructors that were getting paid good wages to teach. And I was teaching, very fortunately, I had advanced students, and down the road by the early 90s, I was just teaching 3rd degrees and up. And, my 2nd, 3rd, 4th degrees were teaching the first degrees and stuff. So that's how it evolved in a nutshell. And I really want to give Stephen Hayes credit for bringing the art to the U.S. From Japan. And he gets a lot of bad stuff sometimes from people. And I think some of that's jealousy, but he did a real service to us in bringing it. And, he's still active with it. I haven't seen him in a number of years, but I still have respect for him. Certainly.
Well, had he not done that, people would still be doing taekwondo and whatever. So
right.
Because again, you mentioned the business side. Had he not written books or magazine articles and all that, it's marketing is marketing, right? And put that stuff out there. If he would have done things the way most people run their training groups, man, we wouldn't. Come on, this wouldn't have grown to nearly the way
that's
it did.
true. And that's also I was fortunate to later on help Stephen get more get himself out there to the public when I was on the board of directors of EFC Educational Funding Company / U.S. Martial Arts. I had Stephen in as a guest speaker to a big convention we had, maybe 300-400 school owners there. So he was able to speak to these people, talk about ninjutsu, and he obviously got other people interested in it, and they got him to speak at their schools, et cetera, and do some other business. So that was helpful. And also showing him how to run, because Stephen was a great instructor and did great seminars and the camps he did, Shaz Viga. But at that time, again, this is the late 80s, he really didn't have any experience in running a full-time school. So I was able to show him and help him with that a little bit. And he's doing well. He's got his own programs now. And I sort of want to do my own thing. I personally, I don't emphasize bow techniques or sword because classes are such a finite time. You got an hour. When we started martial arts, most classes were 2 hours long back in the day. Okay,
if not longer.
If not longer. Today, you're pressed to find a school that has a class longer than an hour. or 50 minutes for some of them. So
Right.
if you get students to come 2 or 3 times a week, which is sometimes tough to do, and you only got an hour and a half, you got to focus on stuff that's important. So in my
Yeah.
opinion, I'll preface that statement. In my opinion, I didn't want to spend time thinking do what's a 6-foot Roku shakubo or the sword. I really focused on folding knife, short stick. I even use a shorter stick than a hanbo, because you're not going
Right.
to carry a 3-foot stick on the
Right.
street. People say, "Oh yeah,
Right.
somebody attacked you. You can find a stick on the ground somewhere." Yeah, try to find a stick on the ground, the concrete in downtown Phoenix.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
somebody might have a short baton. They swing at you. You disarm them. Now use the short stick against the second attacker,
Right.
etc. That kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I'm going to roll back here just a
sure.
minute, because we were talking about like losing black belts and
Yep.
people getting all focused on those things. Do you remember, and this actually made its way into movies, do you remember way back in the early days? Because I remember getting phone calls and people that really wanted to train,
Right.
but there was this myth, right, that you had to be a black belt in at least one other martial art before you could train in ninjutsu. Right? Do you remember that?
No, I don't remember that off the top of my head.
Oh, because
I know
these things
the Ninja Boom.
out of all kinds of crap, you know? Yeah, the
Ninja Boom. Well, this is sort of ties into what you're saying, but I remember lots of guys in other styles. They flocked to ninjutsu to do all the weird stuff that they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And some of them ended up eventually getting a Godon, which is the big thing to get back then. Remember that everybody wanted to get the Godon, was the coveted rank.
But we
Now
also called it those of us in the inner circle also called it the go down test, because as soon as people got it, they stopped training seriously.
Exactly. I can't tell you people I know that I ran into or knew over the years that all they wanted was get that Godon. They were done. It's off to the next martial art. So I think Sumi Sensei was using that as a way to sort of romance people out the door. At the ones that didn't want to stay, they left.
Well, he's done that through all the years. I mean, even remember when during Taikai, he stopped doing that at a certain point. But during Taikai, like there would be this Godon test on like Saturday night or something like that, right?
Yep.
And then first thing Sunday morning, he would call all the new Godon up. And I think I was one of the last ones in that kind of mix, because I held my Godon off until Bud Malmstrom, because I went to a Taikai that he had hosted, and we were supposed to bring paperwork and all that. And again, I conveniently forgot mine. And he said, "Tough shit, I'm your paperwork. You're taking your test." But anyway, the next morning, all these people were ushered up on stage and they all had to demonstrate.
Right.
And at the end of the demonstration, Hatsumi Sensei would always say something. One sticks in my head because he made reference to stars, but he would make reference to, like, here's all your examples, right? In one case, he said, here are all the stars, like stars in the sky. Some are bright, some are dim. Who are you going to attach yourself to, or who are you going to use to navigate your path by, or something like that, right? I mean, people always, they got up there and they thought it was this great honor because they were demonstrating, but he was showing off. He was putting people on display, and then students, needed to, develop that faculty and decide who was worthy of following or whatever, So anyway,
I mean,
he did that a lot.
He did, and I think, I was with the Bujinkan a long time. How the Bujinkan changed over the years, as you know, many times. It became. I was interested in more modern day stuff, and going back to what you talked to as a cop. My situation, I was bullied a lot as a kid, which is very common then, 40, 50 years ago, and today. So that's one of the reasons I decided I had an opportunity to start martial arts in my early 20s, and I took advantage of it. And again, eventually segued over to doing ninjutsu. But I stuck with it for a long time, and I really enjoyed the teachers. I mean, there were some really great teachers, not only Hayes Sensei, but the Japanese Shihan. And I enjoyed the training, but I got to the point where I just felt it wasn't for me anymore. So I left formally left the Bujinkan in 2001. I had just before that, I had published 4 training manuals in my modern ninjutsu program. I did that in 2000, and Hatsumi Sensei wrote me a really nice letter congratulating me on publishing the 4 training books. That year was also the last time I trained in Japan, which is in 2000. So, and if my memory serves me correctly, about a year later, I received, to my surprise, an embarrassingly high Dai Shihan promotion certificate in the mail. So Hatsumi sent me this certificate, and I go, considering the fact that, previously I hadn't trained with him in a year, and he had established his, sort of unheard of ranks of 11th to 15th degree black belts.
Right.
And it had really no established curriculum. And it's becoming pretty prevalent, seeing all these people going up these different levels. I just felt that since I hadn't really trained a year, why did I get this thing in the mail, a year later? And I just, I really don't need that. I think that was an issue with the Bujinkan, still is today, because a lot of the other martial arts stylists, they look at this, they say, what's this deal about 15 degrees of black belt? And these people, on their business cards, and they're listing their Dan grade, and all this stuff. And so that was it. And I really wanted to focus more on making this a modern art. So my tagline is 900-year-old legacy, 21st century reality. And that's what my modern ninjutsu program is about. So that's what cool. I focus on.
Sorry, my dog is down here and is starting to make some noise. I apologize.
No problem. So basically, that was the reason I wanted to modernize it. I wasn't happy with this advanced grading thing that was confusing to people, not only myself, my students, but people coming into the schools trying to figure out what's this whole thing about, different Dan.
Well, when you and I first got involved, I think the highest rank that was promotable to, right, was the Godan test, or was Godan.
Right.
And at that point, you became a Shidoshi.
Right.
And you were supposed to start your own network, right? You were supposed to start your own, basically an organization or whatever, and help, help the Bujinkan grow. But that was kind of like the pinnacle, right? And then there were, pardon my language, there was a shit ton of Shidoshi running around. So 5 more ranks were added, right? But there was never any standardized curriculum, right? And actually, I have in somewhere in my notes, I have the curriculum from white belt to Shodan out of the Japanese system, right?
Yeah, I have it too. I have the same thing.
People used to ask, why does the Kasumian, which is the program you and I went through, right? Yeah. Why does that have so much stuff in it? But out of Japan, right? This was the official one.
Oh, well, yeah.
Stephen Hayes' short answer was, when all the other Shidoshi got together to decide this stuff, I wasn't there. So, but if you compare them, right, at that point, way back in the day, right, I would have put any of my 5th Q against anybody that had a Shodan. And we're talking in the mid to late 80s, right? Because the amount of stuff that our guys had compared to, because they only had to know Sanshin, the Kyonopo, a couple of strikes and whatnot, and that's consistently training for like 6 months, and you had a Shodan, right? So, and of course that caused people to flock to the place where rank is easiest, right? So,
I agree with you totally, because a skeletal curriculum for Bujinkan would be an understatement, written one. And again, I come from an education background, being a teacher,
sure.
And so I taught high school about 6 years or so. So it's important to have something in writing. People know where they're going. You just can't fly by the seat of your pants, which I think they do. But the same token, you can't have too much. So it's that fine line, like Goldilocks,
Yeah.
So if it's too much, it becomes overwhelming. So what I found myself doing, and then you got these guys in the last 15, 20 years are kata collectors.
That started like in the mid 80s, as soon as they realized that. Because everything before that, my notes all said like Ichimonji versus hook punch or
there was
whatever.
We didn't have kata. We didn't study kata because Hayes wasn't.
They steered around that. Hatsumi Sensei, Stephen Hayes, they all steered around it because they were trying to distinguish this from the
Right.
conventional way of doing things. But as
And then
soon as
then
those
it
people
happens.
found it, holy
Oh yeah,
crap! And
the
then
floodgates opened.
and the internet was in its infancy, so some of the earliest stuff were these kata lists being thrown around,
Right.
you know, and then people could download them and then run around and, hey, it was like stamp collecting, right? Do you have this one? Do you know that? Can you show me this one? I remember
I
people.
remember Hayes saying his famous quote was Stephen would say, collect them all, impress your friends.
That's right.
About the
Yeah.
katas.
One of the seminars that Manaka Shihan had come back. It was one of the years that Stephen Hayes had him for a festival, and the kata collectors were like on fire. I don't know how the notebook reappeared or the rest of the story. I just know that there was a statement made the day after this happened. Somebody had found their way into Manaka Sensei's and into his hotel room and stole his notebook.
Oh God, I never heard that one.
That's a special kind of stupid.
Oh,
I mean, you know.
Yeah, well, the reason I brought that up is that I think at this, I've been doing martial about 50. Is that I want to? I don't want to too much. So from having too little with an initial with the Bujinkan and having way too much. Even Stevens cut back. I think I've cut back my curriculum.
Yeah, I cut mine back. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do a lot of things in specialty workshops or seminars, and allow people to add it on if they want to do that. Right?
Like I said, I one of the first things I did was I just said, hey, I don't have time to teach longbow or sword. And I know it's not classical, but I just don't. I rather spend more time on grappling stuff, counters to things. I do a lot of stuff with countering somebody who's maybe a jiu-jitsu guy or an aikido guy, so that kind of stuff. That's basically with modern ninjutsu, I try to focus on a couple of things, and I think I've come to the conclusion that number one, it's really important to have realistic attacks with street setups. Yeah, meaning you have to have the attacker practice body language and verbiage that attackers can use on the street. They can't stand there with their hands up like a boxer and start everything from that position, because street guys don't do that. They don't put their hands up. They put their hand down. They look away. They have all these tells. They may walk. There's a whole bunch of tells that people do before they attack you. They might move towards one side, loop a punch over your shoulder. They might distract you. There's all kinds of things. You got to learn these tells. And so I think that's really important.
Yeah, we'll have people start farther away,
and
then walk toward each other, like kind of a mall scenario is what I call it, where you realize that you're walking towards somebody, and then you kind of sidestep, and they sidestep, and then you go in the and you kind of do this little dance, right? And then you smile at each other as you walk by. But at a certain point, you realize, no, he's blocking my way on purpose, right? And then it starts to come together, and then you have to manage that space. And start to bring your hands up as he brings his, those kind of things. So my intermediate advanced guys have to work on that stuff, because
that's crucial, because you've got to learn to recognize the attacker's tells. If you you could have the best techniques on the planet, but if you get engaged by somebody, they make you look away, they distract you, and boom, they sucker punch you. It doesn't matter. You weren't aware of the first attack was when he was in range and he started talking to you, trying to distract you. That's part of the scenario, the setup, I call it. So that's really important to work on. And to me, there's two basic types of attacks, two groups. First one I call an escalated attack. This is something you might call it a bully facing you, or somebody comes up to you, they give you some stuff, they give you some crap. They're trying to tell you this, tell you that, and they're trying to be aggressive. You tell them, hey, look,
they're trying to get your brain somewhere else.
And you do all the right things. You get your hands up and you say, look, I don't want a problem, da-da-da-da-da. And they're still not being dissuaded. So they're escalating it. They're trying to get you. So that's one kind of attack. They might, come straight up to you and do that. But the second type of attack, which I think is actually more important to practice against, is what I call a premeditated attack. Premeditated. So an escalate is like a bully attack, but a premeditated, where it's like a mugger, and he's going to attack you maybe from the flanks or from the rear, unannounced. He's going to sneak up on you. Okay, and you got to plan for that. So I like doing striking techniques where you're being punched from behind or punched from the side, sort of like what the Saki test is supposed to be about.
Right.
with that
Absolutely.
intention.
That intuitive sense is huge,
Right.
especially on the street.
Yeah, so you got to train for that, not just to pass the Godon test with the Shinai coming down at you in Seiza, which
Right.
I don't do, because I do my Godon test where you got to deal with a punch coming at you from behind your head when you're
Oh,
standing up, not laying down, and your eyes are open.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so make it a little more realistic,
Yeah.
in my opinion,
Yeah.
to do it
I
that way.
actually I created I created a whole bunch of drills, but I was just talking to my students about one that we're going to be working on here again soon, that where it's an either or kind of scenario, and so we play kind of a friend or foe kind of thing, right? So um, whoever the defender is supposed to be, we have them leave the room, and then the other two partners decide who's friend and who's
Sure.
foe, right?
Right.
And then they decide who's going to do the attack that we're doing,
Right.
right? So people often get confused because, well, why would a friend attack me? And I'm like, okay, you got to back up here a little bit, all right? So here's what's going to happen. It doesn't matter if it's friend or foe. Whoever is actually putting their hands on you, here's what they're going to do. They're going to grab you by your jacket, right, or your shirt or whatever, and they're going to yank you sideways. And then if it's friend, they're going to bring their hand up and pat you on the shoulder like they just yanked you out of the way of a car.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah.
okay, you're good, right? Okay.
That's creative.
Good, right? Yeah. And then if it's the attacker, obviously he's going to do the same thing. Hands on,
Right.
yank you to the side, and then haul off to punch you. Right?
That's great.
So
Yeah.
the whole idea here is if you resist right away, or like a lot of guys, they'll learn techniques and then they jump right to technique. Well,
Right.
if you drop your friend and he was trying to pull you out of the way of a car, you both get run over.
That's
And
good. Good point.
If you spend too much time trying to sort things out, just using your eyes or whatever, and you're not using that intuitive sense, you're going to get slammed by the other guy, right? So it's that way of, you're in the thick of it. You're
Right.
disoriented. You don't know why you're being grabbed or yanked. So you've got to work through the cloud to get to, what happens.
Any kind
on
of
top of
process.
that-
That's great.
On top of that, most people are so afraid of getting hit. I've been hit more often than I can tell you. And sometimes I'm lucky that it was forward of the pivot point. But, how many times do MMA guys get punched in the head or the face or whatever, right? I think that's overestimated target.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I agree with you. You're doing the right stuff there, and I support that. I think it's crucial that one thing we have to do is make the attacks more realistic to what 21st century attacks look like.
Absolutely.
For example, against a knife, nobody's going to stick their arm out and lock that elbow and hold the knife out there for 5 seconds while you do 16 things to him.
Right.
That's not realistic.
Right.
The knife attacks today are the short shiv thrusts, sewing machine thrusts. They come up and grab you. I read some statistics about, I think 71% of the time in a fight with a knife, you're never going to see it, number one.
Right.
That's hard to do. And if the guy grabs you and shoves you backwards, while he does a sewing machine stab, and most people who aren't trained, they fall over backwards. And that's when they go on the ground, then they're dead. So you got to train against that kind of, you have to look at statistics. What type of attacks are people dealing with on the street today, and skew your self-defense, whatever martial art you're doing. If you're doing self-defense martial, if you're doing, sport taekwondo, that's a different story. Okay. But don't tell people you're going to teach them self-defense. You're teaching sport taekwondo or sport something else. That's a bait and switch. But dealing with a realistic attack like this, that type of knife attacks you see today, and especially dealing with somebody punch you from behind or from the side, and then dealing with that's I think is extremely realistic, and that's what we have to do if we're going to make this viable for the 21st century.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that there's still an air of, I don't know, mystical thinking when it comes to dealing with a sensei or, a teacher or whatever. So a lot of people just expect that we've done all the work. And so we're going to share that with them. Not that we haven't and not that we don't. Right. Mm-hmm. But in a way that can be lazy. Right. Because
you got to train.
I came from a violent background and I came from law enforcement. So anytime a teacher taught anything, if they mentioned that, well, guys on the street do that, I'm going to look that up and see how often that happens. Right. I'm going to do my due diligence because I need to make sure that smoke's not being blown up my 7th point of contact.
Well, I
Right?
think it's important to question things. And the more
Yeah.
I started doing ninjutsu, again, you talk about the reverence and respect for your teachers. Hatsumi Sensei, other Dai Shihan up in Japan, when I trained back then years ago. But
Right.
it comes to a point where you have to examine, what do I really want to do, and is this really working for me? Is this look like a realistic attack? Like
Right.
then just to deal with a simple cross punch like a boxer throws, as opposed to a lunging straight punch, which you see done all the time in
Right.
in classical ninjutsu. That's
Right.
not realistic. You got to deal with round kicks. You got to deal with back kicks. You got to deal with jabs. That should be part of the training in modern ninjutsu, in my opinion, because it's
Right.
easy to perform a LARP, LARP. Have you heard that? That's live action
Right.
role playing.
Yeah.
And a lot of that I see in training on videos and stuff. That's what it is. Your attacker's not resisting. They don't try to throw a follow-up attack. You do a joint lock on them, they don't resist. But it's a lot tougher to do an onikidaki on somebody if they're trying to muscle you, or if they're stronger than you and you think it's going to go easy, and all of a sudden they reverse you. So it
Right.
makes you have to work on your footwork, be sensitive to the how they're pressuring, how they're trying to recover from the take you put on them. That's all part of the training.
Well, I think the step by step is important, and I think those big models help with that. But you got to get past that as quickly as possible, right? Because people want to learn the technique,
Right.
but they also need to grow past learning the technique to recognize
Yes.
when that technique's even viable, right?
Right.
Is this even a good idea? Because you mentioned, somebody having stronger arms, bigger arms, whatever. I mean, I mention to students all the time, there are certain people, certain builds, certain fighter types
Right.
that I'm not even going to attempt this on.
Well, you have to
right?
remember that in Japan in the 15th century, it's a homogeneous culture. Everybody's
Right.
5'3" and 130 pounds soaking wet.
And
Okay.
they've all been trained from childhood that this is the Japanese way to do things. This is the correct way to do things, and everybody falls in line, right? So
Well, that's why
I,
a lot of the soldiers at the end of World War II, the U.S. Army guys who were big GIs, they were defeating some of the Japanese masters in judo because they were like a foot taller and outweighed them by 50, 80 pounds.
right,
So
right.
you got to take into consideration. That's not all one size fits all.
Well,
So
that plays into, if you're always doing, or you either get really, really good and better than everybody else doing the same thing, or you got to do something different, right? And that was the shortcut of Chuck Norris's sport martial arts career, right? I mean,
right,
when he came on the scene, he was the only Korean stylist
right.
going up against Japanese karate guys. So he was winning. When
And
did
he
he
had
lose?
the Chuck Norris Blitz.
Yeah.
He was famous for it, just charging
Yeah.
in straight, and everybody's going on straight line then. So until
And when did he lose? He lost against another Korean stylist, and he switched over to movies after that. So I mean, that's a summarized version, but nobody was prepared for that thing that he was doing. Right?
And I think that leads to the fact that a lot of people who do ninjutsu, we'll talk about the art we do,
Right.
they get so into this role playing thing that they don't really get into learning to counter techniques, learning to resist techniques. In fact,
Right.
the stuff, pretty much all my second degree curriculum, the second degree black belt, is how to counter joint locks and throws and arm bars that you learned under black belt.
Yeah.
So
See, I have that at second to third degree. But yeah, it
it's
has
got
to be in there.
it's got to be there somewhere, wherever you
It has
put
to
it.
be in there. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Right. And
that
when you
way,
start dealing with multiple attackers, when you start dealing with, I mean, I have things where maybe you're carrying a weapon, because we do gun seminars and things like that too.
sure.
But people will want to rely on the weapon too much.
Oh yeah.
And I'll say, okay, let's say you walk into a situation, his gun's already out, yours isn't. You're going to have to operate like you don't have
That's exactly
one
right.
until you can get to yours or disarm him or whatever. Right?
Well, it's not. You could apply some of the like in ninjutsu on the scrolls. There's some kata like shonin shunsoku, which are defenses against sword draws. You
Right.
can modify those to deal with handgun draw or somebody reaching for a knife. You just got to
Yep.
be creative and just modify and massage the stuff around a little bit, so it will work.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
I think that's important.
You got to get past the form to look at the principles and concepts that the form is embodying.
So, good
And
point.
then get past that.
So you have to learn the form in order to break the form.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So and I think it's crucial that sometimes people, they forget you got to keep training in basics. So, I'm still, even though I teach a modern version, and even the kamae, like Seigano kamae, I teach a little more modern version where you're not showing like you don't want to look like you're doing martial arts, because somebody's got a
Absolutely.
cell phone and they see you going to some kind of fancy kamae or posture. Oh, he's in martial arts. So you got to disguise that too. So I try to modify the kamae and even some of the techniques so they look, again, so many videos, you're not going to look like you're the aggressor. So that's part of the strategy as well.
Absolutely. How do you hide this stuff? I mean, I still think that there's a purpose for Hensu Jutsu and all these other ancillary things, but we're not dressing up to invade some area, right?
Exactly.
How do you make what you're doing look like Taekwondo or something to get him to think that he knows what's going on, only to run into something different, or however you're going to play that, right? I think it's really important. Let's do this. Let's take a quick Q&A thing.
Sure.
I don't know if James knows of anything else that's popping in, but let's do that before we go on much farther with this. So, James, anything, questions, comments, other than the typical "Hey, how you doing" kind of thing?
No questions, no comments, just the "Hey, how you doing" kind of stuff.
Okay. No, we're both full of shit, or one of us is, or nothing like that either. Oh, okay.
No.
Well, look at you, Will. You're just impressing the crap out of people.
Oh, well, it's either that or they don't care what I'm saying. I hope it's the former.
So let me ask something else here. So you were already alluding to this, right? But what do you think is missing, other than this other, bad guy, paying attention to modern attackers, right? But what else do you think is missing from most students' training, and how should they go about fixing that thing? So you talked about making sure that the training matches the way people are going to attack, but what else do you think is missing?
Well, that, as I allude to a little bit, making your defenses or your movements and defenses fit, again, so you don't look like you're a martial artist per se, and also make it streamline it. Nothing's too fancy. You see some of these guys do techniques where it's like 15 things they're doing when they could have done it, finished the job in 3 or 4. Okay.
Yeah.
I was watching a video the other day from, I'm not going to mention his name, but the King of Combat. That should ring a bell.
The King of Combat.
Remember him? Okay.
I've heard that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, years. So I just watched an old video that he had, some videos he did years ago on Panther, the Panther.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was watching, I go, God, it was pretty impressive as far as athleticism and jumping around and, hook kicks and jumping into head scissors and all that. And I was thinking, it was 18 moves he did on this guy who just threw one punch, didn't try to do a counter. And again, it was a classic example of that LARP I talked about, live action role playing. And it looked impressive athletically, and it looks like martial ballet or something. But again, practicality, I don't know.
I remember one video that I watched that he had done. And again, we won't name names, but he had, it was supposed to be like all free form kind of stuff. And I have my own beliefs about that based on what I saw. But anyway, he got this guy into a mushadori, and it was working. Like the back was arching and the guy was going to go. And it was a slick little move. He got him, right? And then he let go of the mushadori so he could do a spinning back kick. And I thought, what the hell?
Yeah,
right?
Why would you do that?
So it's some people just need to look creative. I often say that a lot of people shouldn't be training in ninjutsu, because ninjutsu by its very nature is very much like the CIA. Like nobody should know you're doing it, right? Nobody should know anything about that. And it's not for people that need to be in the limelight going, I did that. That was me, right? Bud Malmstrom used to always cover that stuff. I mean, it's like,
not, it's not about flash.
Get the hell out of there.
Yes.
Because if you're staying around for the cops, you're risking losing your baby's child, or their college fund or whatever. I mean, and this bullshit thing that people have that I'd rather be tried by 12 than carried by 6.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
you don't understand
No.
trial science. You don't understand. You don't understand what the hell you're saying.
Well,
Because
first
I
of
would
all,
rather not have either going on.
of course, because
So,
one thing, the first thing, Jeff, is that you have to realize if that comes to fruition, you're going to spend 6 figures in legal fees, even if you're innocent. It's not your fault. So if you really
absolutely.
want to go to that group, hey, we got a question came in.
Okay.
I can see it now. Eric Weist. He says, "Do you train street clothes with your students?" Yeah, that's pretty much it. We don't wear gi. That's one thing I
Yeah.
stopped doing. That's again splitting me away. Sort of like we did back in the early days. We never wore gi. Remember that in the early
do.
80s?
I
We
do.
wore street clothes. Yeah,
Yeah.
BDUs. And so I went back to that, and we use like a web belt.
Like
For
we
like
did back in the
Waco.
day, right?
Yeah,
We had
like we
white,
did in the
green, and
day.
black.
That's
Yeah.
it. So I know I just want to do it because you're not going to have a gi on
Right.
and an obi. And so like, again, I felt that's more modern. And sometimes a lot of people wear a coat or wear, I've even had my female students wear high heels and a dress because that might happen when they're being attacked. So
Yeah.
that's a part of making it more modern. So I just
Yeah.
want to
See,
mention that.
we do the uniform thing just so the clothing is more resilient, but there's a couple of days out of every month that are
Sure.
designated as street clothes days because people need that. They need to work that way. Just like we'll have outdoor skills day, so all classes that day meet at a given park. So now you got uneven terrain and you've got obstacles and trees and whatever. So we're always playing with that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I'm pretty much teaching my classes. I've got 4 or 5 a week. They're small. I do mostly private, semi-private lessons now, and I teach them pretty much outside. One of my students has a nice backyard, and we do not like the same thing. The terrain is important. Working on a concrete sidewalk, that's a different feel. Working in an area where it's grass or non-level, working on gravel, you got to do that too. So it all ties into making it more realistic or modern.
Can you move into Kamai, because there's a curb or there's a step behind you that either goes up or down, right? Can you do that and sink and lower with it so that you're not toppling and you're not because all that stuff's around, right? I often talk to my students about what if you have to defend yourself between 2 parked cars, but where are you? Are you flanked by doors? Are you at that plus sign kind of thing near the front corner of the fenders? Whatever.
Right.
I mean, all those things present very specific kind of problems, right? Because the environment's huge.
That's why I wrote the 4 books. I did the training manuals back in 2000 because all the 4 books. One was on dealing modern ninjutsu, secrets of modern ninjutsu versus weapons versus grabbing attacks, punching attacks, kicking attacks. 4 volumes. Everything was in street clothes. Everything was outside. I did a couple stuff indoors, like in an office where somebody comes in, tries to rob you with a gun or knife. But I wanted to make everything was in street clothes. I wanted to make it realistic and in different types of environment between parked cars, like you said. And I've got techniques where that demonstrates that. So anything you do like that and what you're doing, I salute you for. That's what people need to have in their training if they want to do realistic self-defense. Okay, so I think the history and culture and the tradition of ninjutsu is important. Don't get me wrong, and I still have great respect for the Bujinkan and my former teachers that I learned from, including Stephen Hayes, as I mentioned, and the other Japanese Shihan back then. But I think for me, I wanted to do this modern approach, but I still keep the philosophy in, and I really talked to him about this idea of being a peaceful person. Now it happens. I have a banner that says, quote, "If you want more peace in the world, start by making your own life more peaceful."
There you go. Yeah, I don't know if you know that I didn't take full ordination, but I followed the Mikyo path as well. And
I'm aware of that. Yes, I
trained
am.
with Reverend Jikai Stephen Hayes' teacher, and so there's a saying in Tendai, light up your own little corner of the world. Because if we all did that, the world would be a pretty freaking bright place.
There you go. I think that's
Don't worry about
true.
what anybody else is doing until you clean up your own freaking backyard, kind of thing.
Well, so again, what we're just talking on, there should be, in my opinion, if you're going to teach a martial art, you've got to have some kind of philosophy or more of a you
Well,
can
it's a
use the
morals
word
and ethics thing, right?
morals and
I
ethics
mean,
thing. Yeah.
at what point will you act? At what point do you leave things alone, right? I mean, um,
Well,
I think
we both know ninjutsu people, but people in other martial arts who are just bullies, and
absolutely.
they hurt their students all the time. They have this attitude. They're you know, they just don't represent some of the things I think we should be teaching in the martial arts in general, and specifically in ninjutsu. Whether it's
Yeah,
the classical version, which is important, but also you can teach ethics and stuff in the a modern version, like how to talk your way out of a fight. There's a skill that
absolutely.
everybody needs to learn. That to me,
Absolutely.
one of so
De-escalation, you bet. You
you
bet.
got it. So I teach them I have certain things written down that here's how you can avoid entering into a fight. How do you discern this person's body language? Oh, and what do you say when he says this? What not to say? How do
Right.
you hold your? If you look sheepish and weak, well, guess what? You're an easy target. So how you hold yourself, your comportment is very important.
Well, I think that it's important too that, I mean, if it's easier to use this stuff in the moment when you need it and not have to try to remember things if you just make it a part of how you operate all the time. For instance, I saw a like one of these little YouTube short kind of clips. Somebody was being interviewed about dealing with a narcissist, right? And
Uh-huh.
I think martial artists spend an inordinate amount of time, and it's important, right, about dealing with physical attacks. But we don't live, unless you live in a drive-by shooting area or whatever. Most of us don't live in places like that anymore. I, for one, moved, right?
Yeah,
So I
sure.
have my family in a safer place. But they still put all that effort and energy into that, but they can't handle the stress of everyday life.
Yeah.
They are constantly getting into arguments with people or whatever, right?
Yes.
And
Right.
so, somebody brought this thing up about, do you ever call out a narcissist? And I'm like, no, right? Because you're just going to get a bunch of rage coming at you. They're going to flip it and try to make it you. So how do you handle just everyday things that it's an attack? This person is trying to set you up, but they're not setting you up to punch you or stab you or whatever. They're setting you up in a different way, right? So, you call somebody and they go, wow, I haven't heard from you in years, right? They're trying to set things up
Yeah.
so that, they can make it about you, right?
Attacks come
And
in mental attacks, verbal
yeah.
attacks, and you have got to recognize those too.
And what most people would do when they hear that is they go, well, the phone works in both ways or in both directions, except you just played their game, right? But if somebody says to me, well, I haven't heard from you in a long time, I say, you're right, you haven't.
And
What are they going to do with that, right? They have to reinitiate, right? They have to,
right.
So I think that people miss that ninjutsu, attacks are not just physical, right? What
Well, you
about
bring
the
up a
people
good
attacking your
point.
mind,
That's a
your
great
heart?
point.
Yeah,
That's a great point because again, you can set up scenarios in a training or exercises where you talk about that or role play that kind of stuff. Someone's
absolutely.
trying to intimidate you physically or verbally. It may not be a threat of a physical attack, but it may be some kind of condescending or cutting remark or something that they're trying to put you down to make themselves bigger. Of course, we know that
Right.
many people they that's their modus operandi. Very insecure people, they try to put you down, make themselves bigger. We see that, in sports and politics. We see it all through the spectrum. So if you
Yeah.
can recognize that and then keep your calm and keep your cool and keep centered, and just
Well,
like
and
you would,
the psychological operation, or in the military, we used to call it psyops, right? Psychological operations, where they're looking to be they're looking to be perceived as the defender, right? So Hatsumi Sensei has taught on this for decades, right? Where there are no laws to stop somebody from being, from offending you, from calling you all that kind of stuff. But if you punch him in the throat, you're the one going to jail, kind of thing, right?
right,
So what about the guy that initiates a conversation or an argument, pushing you to get to the point where you say something
right,
that's overtly that he could say is offensive, and then he
Right.
can claim that you started the fight,
Right.
right? He jumped you because
Right.
you insulted him, you
Right.
whatever. So those are other setups, not just the jabber moving in or the
Right.
shoot fighter or whatever. What
Right.
about the guy that's initiating? Stephen Hayes was really good at setting up drills like that, right? Where
Sure.
we have like one of us in the middle and then everybody out around, right? There'd be
Yeah.
a game knife or something, right? But the
Sure.
whole idea was to overwhelm you mentally, right? And then everybody would just start talking smack or reaching out and touching you and all kinds of stuff. And you had to be present enough that when the knife came, you could at least sidestep it or let it only glance. I mean, you weren't like having your spleen opened up or whatever, right? But those were huge learning things for me because that pointed to stuff that I could understand, right? Not everything is just a full-on physical attack,
Well,
but
I
it
think
can
it
go
also.
physical. But you bought into the, well, this is
Yes.
just an argument. This is just two guys talking smack. This is just maybe not, right? Maybe this is a full-on setup, and this guy that's talking smack in your face is the distraction, so his friend can come over and slit your throat, or whatever.
And then you can play the psychology both ways, because I often teach too that if it looks you're in a situation and somebody's, let's say you're in a crowded bar or someplace, right?
Sure.
Of course, I have never hung out in those places in many years. Too old for
I
that.
did when I was a cop.
We did. I'm sure you
Because I
did.
had to go in and do what I need to do and get the hell out, right?
So let's say you're in a crowded place, people around, and I had this happen to me once. It was literally in a bar. It was a Friday night, and it was crowded. And I walked in. I actually bumped into this guy. He tilted his pinball machine, and he got really pissed off in my face. He had a guy 3-piece suit on. He must have been a lawyer. He goes, he starts to yell, da 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 da, and I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. It was my fault. I was just clumsy." Oh, da, da. And so let me give you some money here. I gave my wallet. And I gave him like $5 or whatever it was. And as soon as he looked down at the money, I turned and I lost him in the crowd. He looked around. He couldn't find him. I disappeared. Just moved in the crowd. So instead of getting in his face, who are you talking to? What are you talking about? Let's take it outside, which is easy to do if you get your ego involved and so you got to prove something. That's a recipe for disaster. Yeah. And the other thing, turn it around again, you can do this as well. Another thing, if somebody is threatening you or is starting to make motions or gestures to that, and there's other people around, you could say them real loudly, you just threatened to kill me?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden people heard that. They look, now you've established this guy did something. Now, whether he didn't say it or
all
not,
eyes are on him, which is what he didn't want.
That's
right?
Exactly right. So there's that psychology and strategy. I think that's something that is missing in other martial arts, and I think it needs to be even more so done in ninjutsu today, which is stuff we did earlier on. So
absolutely,
any kind of creativity like that's crucial.
Yeah. So one more, and I know we've talked about a butt ton of stuff, right? But from your perspective or your opinion, what do you think that that ninjutsu offers that's missing from a lot of martial arts? I know you were just talking about the psychological stuff,
right?
But if you could name one more thing that you think that the art of ninjutsu offers that most systems don't, because when it comes down to fighting and all that, everybody has their way of doing it, right? But what is it that you think that we offer or that ninjutsu offers?
Well,
right?
I think, you've got all these other martial arts. I mean, there's a lot of good martial arts on the planet, believe me.
Yeah, of course.
There's good martial arts and there's bad instructors and just good instructors. You find both.
There you go. You bet.
But I think what to me, going back to my original statement about ninjutsu, why I liked it originally, is that it really is a complete martial art in a lot of ways, especially what I'd like to, as I say, try to move it forward in the 21st century, because you're dealing with multiple attackers. I teach that a lot. I've got written curriculum all the way up to 9th degree black belt. I mean, written out, which I think is important. And most of the stuff at the high level is all dealing with, multiple attackers, stuff that's very high level skill. It's not just learn another bow kata for 9th dan or something.
Right, absolutely.
So what? I mean, you got to make it more challenging as far as things like that. And also take into account that, I've got students. I got one of my students now going to KUDEN on his 80th birthday next year. And you remember
awesome.
Bing?
I do remember Bing.
89 years old. And he was
Missed him
still
a
training.
lot. Big
Yeah.
was a good guy. Yeah.
So I think ninjutsu is adaptable to different people, different sizes, if you make it so.
Yeah.
I think a lot of martial arts, they don't have that, and it's a complete art. You've got grappling, you've got weapons, you've got fighting with punches and kicks, joint
Right.
locks, wrist locks, ever. So that's the good part about ninjutsu.
Yeah. I would answer the same way. My answer when people ask is like, I would never say that we're better, like as a combat art, than anybody else, because now you're splitting hairs. What I
Right.
would say is that we offer a student more options in resolving something or in handling different types of situations. So for me, it's the options, right? Like you said, grappling and all that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
But also the psychological stuff, right? Can you not even let it go physical, or can you do
Yes.
something verbal to get his
Yes.
brain to lock up that gives you that half second to get the jump? You know what I mean? Or to get out or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? Are you playing with more than just my style versus remember back in the day, Black Belt magazine, all these things.
Yeah.
There would always be these articles, right? If a karate guy met a judo
Right,
guy,
right.
which one would win? Well, now you're down to
That's
practitioner, but tactics, strategies, all that kind of stuff.
that's a
It's
silly
not
question,
the
really.
techniques, right?
No.
Yeah, but people want to play. I mean, and I get it. Ego. We want to know that we're doing the best things and we're giving ourselves the best advantage. And I think that if people actually spoke that out loud
Mhm.
and use that as their litmus test instead of joining something, because a lot of people join martial arts either because their sister's brother's cousin's college roommate's best friend said that was the best one, right? Or
Okay.
it was the one closest to work or home on the drive, and then they
Right.
join, and then ego goes, well, this is the best. Well, how do you know? What's your baseline? What other ones have you looked into and what problem are you trying to solve?
Well,
Right?
that's good because, like I said, both of us, you too. I mean, I had done, Taekwondo for 11, 12 years. I have I had experienced other things. So
Yep,
I knew what I was
absolutely.
looking for. I wanted something where I could deal with grabbing and throwing and
And not
joint
just get
lock.
stuck on a style.
Right. And then, so I was taking pieces of all these other arts, which I called it initially United Martial Arts. That was the name of my dojo initially
Yeah,
before I
it
started
was.
doing ninjutsu at Hayes. And then when I found that again, I said, "Oh, this has all this in here," and it had the philosophy, and it had the mental aspects. So that's, I think, a really important thing that is missing in other martial arts. The ability to adapt. You look at the guys on the ground. There's a lot of guys that are awesome on the ground, grappling, and they're fantastic. I taught a seminar at a place years ago, and this was a combat. No, they were kick. MMA cage fighters. That's what I want to
Okay.
say.
Okay.
Cage
Sure.
fighters, right? They were really good. They had cages in their school. They would fight it.
Mhm.
So I went there with some of my students to teach them. They wanted me to come in, and they want to do weapons defenses, guns and knives, because they never learned that. They were great on
Absolutely.
the ground, but they didn't really know much about stand-up self-defense.
Right.
And
Right.
so it was because a lot of people, oh, well, I'm just going to get them, throw them on the ground. I'm going to break their arm in a
Yeah.
arm lock, or I'm going to choke them out. And like, well, you and I know that you don't want to go to the ground. You don't have to in a street
That's
fight,
right.
because
That's
then
right.
the guy's other buddies come out of the
Kick
van
in
with
the
the
head,
baseball bats
whatever.
and kick it.
Yep. You bet. Yeah.
So
As a matter of
that's
in our most recent fall camp, one of my students actually took some time off, went and did some, Brazilian jiu-jitsu and all that kind of stuff. And we had him do a breakout session so people could get an understanding of, look, if he catches you this way, you're screwed, kind of thing, right?
Mhm.
But even, at the end of his presentation, he made the point that, look, we don't chase you down. We're not good on our feet, that kind of stuff, right?
Mhm.
This is what these people are good at. And so, and then he, also made the point that, the people are lucky that they have the teacher that they do, or they need to find a teacher that can
Mhm.
cover these other options and stuff. So, one of the first things that I ever learned in this art was you don't punch somebody who's really, really good. You don't get into a fist fight with somebody that's really good with their fist, right?
Right.
Same thing with feet. You don't go kicking a kicker
That's what
who
Bruce
has
Lee
way more
said.
experience.
That was
You
Bruce
don't
Lee's
grapple
thing.
a grappler, right? You do.
Right.
You keep him out of his realm, right?
Mhm.
It's like Pete Rose wearing a football helmet to a baseball game kind
Well,
of
that
thing.
was like I said, that was Bruce Lee's philosophy. That's
Yeah.
why he with the Jeet-Kune-Do and did everything with the grappling and the stuff too. You got to be able to do that.
Yeah,
So I
absolutely.
think that's very important. But you got to be so. The point about the grappling is it's good. You need to learn some stuff on the ground. So I'm also have a problem with traditional people who said I'm teaching self-defense. They never do anything on the ground. So
Right.
that's as bad as not as doing everything on the ground as opposed to doing nothing on the ground. So
Right.
if you're going to do self-defense for the street worthiness of it, you've got to learn some ground stuff. But you can't just want to go to the ground right away.
Right.
So it's again choosing what's going to work in that situation, but having a repertoire of tools that you can pull out of your toolbox at the correct moment for the task at hand at that moment.
Yes, sir. It's problem solving 101, right? So if you don't know what the problem is, how do you go about solving it?
Well, I use a model.
What's that one thing that if all you have is a hammer, then everything's a nail, right? If you practice one style that doesn't have all these options, it's not a broad-based thing, then you're going to try to fix every problem. You're going to try to defend against every scenario based on that thing that you're good at.
Yeah.
And it's a recipe for disaster. I mean, you could luck out in 5 fights, but number 6 comes at you in a way that you never expected, right? So anyway, so let's see if there are any more questions while we're looking for those. What I really like for you to do is let people know if you're open to other people like contact you and stuff. How can they reach out to you for more information or to hook up with you or whatever?
I've got a website. It's a small website. I don't use it that much, but you can get some general information off the website, and it's simple. It's www.modernninjas.com. Now I know there's no S in Japanese, but it's okay. It's easy to people remember. And so Modern Ninjas with the S plural, as this guy Gene do. And .com, modernninjas.com. Now, if people want to contact me by email, it's my name, Will Maier. It's Maier, Will Maier Seminars @gmail. Okay, that's another way to contact me. And that's by phone too. I'm okay with that. Number 602-799-5243. I like talking to people, sharing ideas with them, or answer questions I have. If they want to, ask me anything more about modern Ninjutsu or find out more about classes, seminars, the books I have, the videos I have.
Are your books on your website?
There's a listing of them on there, but they need to contact me, and I'll talk to them about the different books and the different DVDs I have too. Yeah, but again, I just want to share, and I really appreciate you having me come on tonight. Sorry we couldn't get the video working, but we got the audio finally.
That's all right.
But again, I really appreciate what you're doing, because you're bringing people into the fold of taking charge of their own training and asking questions, and you're dealing with different topics. I think they're important for students to deal with, just aside from being in a dojo smacking each other around. Dealing with strategies, dealing with philosophy, dealing with the stuff you deal with. So I salute you. That's great. I'm really glad to do this.
This format actually reminds me of like when training in Japan, going to like Sumaya-san's dojo, right? After a class, like all the junior students are ushered out, and then the seniors, there's a we would call it a coffee table, but there's this low Japanese table brought out. Right. And then whoever the kohai among the seniors is, right, they've already been cooking water and whatnot. And then we'll sit around having water or hot tea or something like that. And now we're either listening to something that Sumaya Sensei thought was important and he's sharing, or we just have this little chit chat that almost always leads to like extra lessons. And that was the idea here with KUDEN, just, having that kind of thing, but we don't all have to be in the same physical location, right? So questions or topics or whatever that you just don't have that kind of time in class to go into all that deeply, right? So this allows me to put things out, and then in class, I can just reference something.
Right.
And then if you didn't see it, hey, check out this, episode. I go into it much more deeply, that kind of thing. So it's out there, right? And that's my thing. So, James, are any questions or comments from anybody? Because we're about to wrap this up.
Got a couple of people that said they enjoyed the conversation so far.
Awesome.
Saw that there. That's great.
Yeah. I really appreciate the fact that you were open to doing this kind of thing.
Well,
because-
I'm glad that we connected over all these years. People move, and sometimes it's hard to stay in touch with people across the country. I'm here in Arizona, but I'm glad
Well,
that
remember when all the seminars were going on, and the yearly festivals and stuff.
sure.
I really missed when all that stuff kind of went away. I mean, it changed a lot, right? Because that was at least one or more times a year that all my Buyu, right, all my martial
Right.
friends that I was really close with, we could all get together in one space. And the cool thing about the friendships that I've developed, the ones that I would call them spiritual friendships, is that we could not see each other for how long, right? And then you and I hopped on the phone a couple of weeks ago,
Right.
and getting some life things out of the way very quickly. I don't know about you, but I felt like we'd just seen each other last week or last month.
Isn't
kind of
that
thing.
amazing how that happens with people that
Absolutely.
can connect? They connect on a level where, like I said, I had this other friends too, where I don't see them for decades, and it's like, oh, it's like I saw him last week. But that's a special kind of and you and I have a bond. We've doing this art so long, and sharing the same. And I used to come to my dojo and take seminars there when you
Yep.
came down to Maryland, and we got to train together in festivals and things like that. So we have a history together, and it was great to reconnect and to say, hey, I know this is where you're at now. This is where I am, and to trade things back and forth, ideas, and that's what this should be. It should be an exchange of ideas to make everybody better. That's what synergy is.
And
People have to
isn't it
work
funny
together.
that we took two completely different paths, and we're teaching things almost exactly the same?
Well, that happens in life, doesn't it?
Yeah, well,
That's a good thing.
It is a good thing. It is a good thing. Quick story here while I'm waiting for other questions or whatever is a bunch of years ago, I was on an article writing kick. There was this site called easyinarticles.com. And I was writing on how this stuff fits in the crime prevention realm, how it fits in women's issues, right? All kinds of things, right? I think I have like over 600 articles that I wrote in probably the course of
Wow.
2 years.
Okay.
But I was also very competitive because, there were these people that had written and they were above. And I just decided at one point I was going to sit at the top of that number of whatever. So wrote all these things, but I had done one on like knife defense, just some principles for, knife defense, right? I don't care what art you're doing. Pay attention to these key points, right? Well, I'm not watching what everybody else does. I don't care what everybody else is doing, right? I'm here to serve my students. So when I get this email from this guy, it's just all hot and heavy, and he won't say it, but he's alluding to the fact that he thinks that I stole his idea, right? Because coincidentally, in the previous week or two, he had written the same kind of article, not the same article, but the same kind of things. And we mentioned the same things. And I said, one, I don't even know who you are. And then he referenced that he was on the same platform. And I went and looked it up and went, oh, you're one of the guys I was trying to leapfrog over, right? But what he said was, I'm up late at night trying to think about what I'm going to write on. I don't need people to anyway. So he was alluding to this, right? And
Right.
what I said was, if we both know what we're talking about, of course it's going to sound similar, right? I don't
Yeah,
have to steal your stuff, right?
Right.
But if we both know what we're talking about, because you look at the articles, nothing is the same except a couple of the points, right? But the syntax, it doesn't even look like it was rewritten or anything like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if we both know what we're talking about, of course it's going to sound similar, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that makes sense. Sure.
right. So anyway, and then I never heard from him again, right? It wasn't like we connected or anything like that. Like, hey, let's actually try to share some ideas kind of thing, right? But anyway, that was just one of those things that just kind of popped out. Like I was accused of not even plagiarizing, just like stealing his idea.
Well,
Well,
that comes with techniques too. I mean, I have several people that I know. A couple of my students and people I'm still associated with, and they have skills that I don't have. Like one of my black belts is a extremely good grappler, so I had him teach a session on grappling at the Taikai I taught here in Arizona in May. Another
sure.
guy is a former, again like you, a cop and a former military
Right.
cop. So he taught a session. Another guy who's a former bouncer has had knives pulled on him.
Yeah.
So if you take people from that experience and they teach a little of that, what they know, their expertise, because I don't know everything. I don't have experiences that other people have, like you as a cop or
Right.
doing all the grappling. But again, I can bring in people in my organization or affiliate with me to do that. And again, then I have an area, different areas that I have expertise or knowledge in. So that's what you said, sharing ideas, whether it's ideas about how to run a program or about techniques or about philosophy or about talking about making us better people. You got to bring people together. And that's what you're doing with this podcast.
Absolutely. Well, I try. So anyway, James, any questions, comments from anybody?
We got a few more people said they enjoyed it. You know, 2 or 3 people I see here said they enjoyed it and liked it and shared it on Facebook.
Awesome. I don't want James to feel like he doesn't have a job tonight. James actually runs my online side of things, so the programs and all that. So he's
yeah. I've been thinking about doing some of a podcast myself, so I'll have to
awesome.
Talk to you about it sometime. But I think you're doing good stuff, and you got a variety of topics. Now, do you have a library of these? I believe, correct? Or
yeah, they're all of them. Once it's done, this simulcast to my Facebook page and YouTube and all that. But I decided to do it in video format because it was I could leverage it, right? So it's on. If you go to my YouTube channel, Kage 36 or what is it, James Jeffrey Miller, something like that, right? If you click on the live button, they're all there.
Right.
But what happens afterwards is this gets installed on my one website. We use a podcast. It's a plugin for WordPress, and then we're tied in with Spotify and Google Play and what is it, Apple Podcast, or it used to be iTunes or something. All these things. I mean, like hundreds of podcast directories. It gets uploaded to there, and then what ends up happening is because this is all connected to those things, those directories all end up logging it. So we have a presence on hundreds of podcast directories. So of course they're audio only, but it's a great way to leverage things. So I have no idea how many total followers I have. If I only went with what I see, like signing on live, I'd have probably stopped this a long time ago. But the number of views on YouTube and the number of people that we have doing things.
Well, you're certainly being progressive, and I think that's important. We just can't take this art that's been around for 900 years or so and keep it as a museum piece.
It's always changed with the times.
It's got to change with the times.
Absolutely.
Technology changes. The types of attacks we see, we change. The world's different today than it was 500 years ago in some respects, and for lots of reasons. So
could you imagine students sitting down and hand copying the scrolls or whatever, right? I mean, I've told people in the past, even through like when I'm teaching Mikko stuff, because the traditional way is, and my teacher did this with me, right? He would sit down with his stuff and he would say the stuff out loud, and I wrote it down the way I was going to remember just to pronounce it back. But I mean, we did chapter after chapter after chapter. But he'd lean in and go, I really do believe that back in the day, if they'd have had a Xerox machine, they'd have made copies that way, right?
Well, when I was doing Reiki, and I had to do the same thing. I had to write stuff down. I had to take personal responsibility to write down the material, not have it spoon fed to me.
Sure.
But I think
writing is the active part of thinking. So
yes, it is.
It actually helps. Yeah.
But I think I
still prefer taking notes in a notebook over trying the technology, because half your brain is making sure the technology is working, and I don't think it gets in nearly the same as if I
Well, I think
scribble out notes.
there's merit to scribbling notes. I have notes from God
Oh,
early mid '80s that some I can't discern anymore.
yep.
But
Yep.
so I go through 'em. I try to update my curriculum at least a couple times a year. I did some studying some college with and our niece with Dan Osanto years and years ago. In
Yeah,
fact,
yeah, 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 yeah.
he came to my dojo.
Yeah. Leo
Guys,
Gage, Dana Santo,
yeah, he's
absolutely.
amazing martial artist. But he would tell me that he would change his curriculum, several times a year, and because he would say, "I only can teach you what I know today." That was one of his things. And so you got to be willing to realize that, hey, I got to keep moving this forward and tweak it every once in a while and look at it, say, well, is this what I want to teach this year? I taught this a couple of years ago. Maybe I'm different now. Maybe I feel that I've learned more from seeing things, observing things, watching things, seeing
Yeah.
stuff on YouTube. I watch a lot of it's funny, I watch a lot of actual altercations. You can see those on the YouTube all
Those
the
are the
time.
videos I prefer over
Oh,
watching
because you'll see a
these
real fight what the
guys
guy
doing a
does,
thing.
and you
Yep.
get
Yeah.
oh, this guy did this, he looked away. I mean, you can get real a real knowledge of what's real street fights look like by just doing that on YouTube. So I think
Yeah.
that's important. That's part of training as well.
Yeah, James and I were talking about, doing updating the programs that I have. That some of them are a decade, 2 decades old, because I look at things differently now. I know more. Whatever, right?
Uh-huh.
So there's so much more that could be not so much added, but tweaked or whatever, or leave that program as kind of an entry level, and then here's version 2.0, 3.0, whatever, to use modern tech stuff. But
Yeah,
anyway,
you've got to have that.
yeah, cool. So were there any questions other than Will is great, Will is good, Will trains with steel and wood?
Well, I just hope people got an idea of that in their training as a student, no matter who they're studying with. You take responsibility to ask questions. Get good on your basics. Encourage your instructor to explain things to you that you don't understand, but do some research on your own. What's kind of attacks are prevalent in today's society, and again, if you don't understand why something doesn't work right, or ask. Sometimes students are afraid to ask questions. I encourage that. I tell
Absolutely.
them the only dumb question is the one you don't ask. So
come on, there's some dumb questions.
Well, but it's okay. I'd
But
rather
I don't
have
want to stop people from asking questions
right,
because
right.
they're afraid I'm going to think it's a dumb
Well,
question.
in some schools, this. I mean, I have one of my students also trains in the karate school, and he tells me, "Oh, I asked a question to the teacher, and he said, oh, I don't ask questions." Or, and
Yeah.
just do it this way.
I've known a couple of guys that maybe this was more prevalent back in the day, but a new student joins, and next thing you know, you're doing sparring, and the teacher's wiping the floor with this guy because he's trying to make a point, and the point isn't to teach you something other than I'm in charge, kind of thing. And
that's true in a lot of martial arts.
well, it's true in a lot of areas in life too, right?
You
don't question, you don't whatever. And if I yell louder than you, then I've won the argument.
Oh yeah, when you lack facts, always yell.
Yeah, that's right. Right. Don't confuse my silence with acceptance. Right. So, anyway, James, anything? I'm getting no. All right. Well, Will, thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate it, my friend. Of course, we'll stay in touch because we're still on this side of the grass. So
yes,
cool.
Yes, we are. I'm working on 74 next year, so the time is gone. When I feel like I'm on a good day, I feel like I'm in my 30s still, maybe 50s.
Yeah, but
somewhere in that range.
we're still more active than. I love it when we talk to somebody who's like in their late 20s or mid 30s or whatever about martial arts, and they go, maybe if I was much younger. And I'd say, I'm pushing 60 in a couple of weeks. When you're ready to get your rocking chair, let me know. I'll carry it for you so you don't strain yourself.
And as you bring that point up, I know my training has changed now at 73 than it was when I was 23, 33, 43. And we've all had injuries, different things, and you got to adapt to your body's changing, you know.
Absolutely.
So that's important that you stay cognizant of that, and then therefore when you have older students or students, I mean, I had 4 black belts in wheelchairs. There were wheelchair black
You had a
belts.
black belt. Yeah, Eric.
Blind.
You had a black belt that was
He was
blind.
blind. Yeah, he was quite good.
Absolutely.
He was quite good.
Absolutely. He
Bing
was
was 80.
phenomenal.
Bing was 88 years old, and I
Yep.
had two deaf black belts. So, but how did that happen? Well, I was able to take the curriculum and say, look, I'm going to fit the curriculum to you and not make you force you to fit to the curriculum.
Right.
So the guy in the wheelchair, one of the guys, I would actually got another wheelchair. I sat next to him, and
That's how I've taught people.
Yep.
I get in the wheelchair and do it with them.
You got to do it with them. So, so you have to be.
I had a guy that had. Do you know what spina bifida is?
Yes, I do. One of my black.
Yeah, I had a guy that had spina bifida.
Yep.
So his ankles were strapped together, and then he had those crutches, right? I taught him for a good year, and most of his stuff ended up being more hanbo or stick stuff because they were permanently attached to him, right? I mean, this is what you got, right? So, and I think that's a sign of a good teacher too. If you can adapt things to the student so the student can progress. I've seen way too many of these demos where like paraplegics or whatever are doing things, but they're doing the same kata.
Yes.
And they're allowed to believe that this is, and everybody's cheering them.
It's great.
Awesome. Yeah, but if this guy's attacked, that's not going to work just because he can do it on a mat during a demonstration means nothing, right? So how can he really, I don't care if he's missing 4 limbs and all he can do is tuck his head and roll into their legs like a freaking bowling ball. How can he do it, right? That's just a huge thing. That's a whole other topic when, we're talking about being a good teacher. So,
well, it's about adapting. Part of ninjutsu is about adapting.
And because of all the options, you can pull, like I do corporate workplace violence stuff. I'm not going in and teaching these guys Seigan and stuff like that, right? What are we working on? Are we working on de-escalation? What are we working on to train your people? Great. I can reach into this and pull out very specific things, create a program, and here you go, right? And it's going to be what they need, right? Not what I want to teach. So many people have tiny little freaking training groups because they're trying to find people so that they can teach themselves, right? I mean, it's not about what other people need. It's,
they just want to practice. They want to practice something.
Yeah, and there's people online that are this way too, right? This is the way I did it, so this is the way you have to do it. This is the way I learned it, so you have to learn it this way, right? Hatsumi Sensei admitted over the years, right? He used to say, "I'm a terrible teacher. Find people that can communicate better," right? So he played more the show and tell thing, and then would do long philosophical kind of discussions. But everybody that wants to walk around mimicking, right? Like Soke, they would even use broken Japanese crap like that. I mean, come on. Well,
I think that some people don't see through that, or they either don't see through it, or they want to be part of that, where they're just following around and being, oh, look at me, I'm doing this little thing, but they're not really doing real martial arts. They're doing the fantasy idea of what a ninjutsu.
They want to play the master disciple game, like they're living in 13th century China and they're in some monastery somewhere.
Yeah, so, and I think the biggest thing is, again, just having a good heart. I think that boils down to that, being a good person. And
I used to have a bumper sticker from one of our friends. Richard Sears had him made up.
Richard Sears, yes.
Indiana. Yeah,
I know him.
So he had a bumper sticker that had the kanji, the nin kanji, and it said "the art with heart." Of course, nobody got it except us, right? But that part of the kanji, right? So anyway, I don't need to keep believing this. They're going to kick us off here soon. So
okay,
Will, thank you very much.
Hey, I hope everybody had some fun. We had some interesting things we talked about, and if anyone wants to contact me via the information, I'm happy with that, and
cool.
Here to answer. And stay in touch.
Of course. All right, dude. I gotta sign you off here. Sorry about that.
No problem. Take care. Bye-bye.
You bet. All right. We're gonna go ahead and wrap this up. I hope everybody, we weren't just like placating us, right? I trust that wasn't happening. But anyway, James, you and I have a little discussion here after this is done. But we're going to go ahead and wrap this up, and I will talk to everybody again next week on KUDEN.
Get more of KUDEN Radio, subscribe through your favorite podcasting site, or join our clan of serious modern warriors at onlineninjaacademy.com.